Blackstone Audiobooks presents Spinoza in 90 Minutes by Paul Strathern. Introduction. Spinoza is the philosopher's philosopher. He constructed a metaphysical system of astonishing brilliance and beauty, which is all the more astonishing for being derived neither from reality nor experience. He was a deeply religious man, though apparently practicing no particular faith. His philosophy is permeated with the idea of God, and he lived the life of a saint. Consequently, he was abominated by all religions during his lifetime, and after his death his works were vilified, vigorously prosecuted, and burned. Nowadays, when philosophers are not required to believe in God, live scandalous lives like the rest of us, and are expected to pay some attention to reality, Spinoza is held up as a philosophic exemplar. Perhaps if he is eventually canonized, he will become the patron saint of hypocrites. At the core of Spinoza's philosophy is his all-embracing system. This straddles the hierarchical world of medieval certainty and the emerging belief in the power of reason alone to reach the truth. His mathematically generated system embodied Deus sive natura, God or nature. It started from basic assumptions, and by a series of geometric proofs constructed a universe which was also God. His is the classic example of pantheism, the belief that God and the universe are one and the same thing. This has a curious echo in the modern Gaia hypothesis, where our planet is viewed as a single vast organism or self-regulating cell. Spinoza's system also yielded a holistic ethics similar to that favored by modern ecologists. Harm the world, and you harm God. Harm another, and you harm yourself. Spinoza's political theory was equally ahead of its time. He believed that the purpose of the state was only to protect the individual, in order that he could freely develop himself and his ideas by use of enlightened reason. Spinoza's systematic, theistic approach renders his philosophy an anachronistic oddity. Ironically, the conclusions he drew from this out-of-date system are deeply in accord with modern thought, from science to politics. Both his system and the conclusions he drew from it have a compelling beauty unequaled in the history of philosophy. If beauty were truth, and truth beauty, as Keats claimed, Spinoza's philosophy would be all we know, and all we need to know. Spinoza's life and works. Baruch, or Benedict de Spinoza, was born on November 4th, 1632, in Amsterdam. He was descended from Portuguese Sephardic Jews. His name derives from the town of Espinosa in northwestern Spain. His family had emigrated to Holland, where they were able to shed the crypto-Christianity forced on them under the Inquisition and return to the Judaism of their forebears. Spinoza's father was a successful merchant who lived in a smart house on Burgwal near the old Portuguese synagogue. His mother, who was also from Portugal, died in childbirth when he was 6. Spinoza's childhood appears to have been blighted by family bereavements. When he was 22, his father died, having buried 3 wives and 4 of his children. Spinoza was educated in the stifling Jewish fashion of the period, spending hours each day in the study of the Bible, the Christian Old Testament, and the Talmud, the authoritative body of Jewish tradition. Despite the excruciating boredom of this severely limited curriculum, Spinoza appears to have enjoyed his studies, and his father assumed that he would become a rabbi. Outside school hours, the young Spinoza was encouraged to take lessons in Latin and ancient Greek. Reality and the modern world appear to have played as little a part in his education as they were to play in his philosophy. But Baruch Spinoza was no young fogey. Jewish students of an independent turn of mind were beginning to chafe against the strictures of orthodoxy. They felt that their spiritual requirements had developed beyond those of a tribe of prehistoric Asiatic nomads, and they began questioning the Bible. The leaders of the Jewish community were becoming deeply worried by this tendency. The United Provinces of the Netherlands was a tolerant society, but only compared with the Ku Klux Klan mentality prevailing elsewhere in Europe. It was the Spanish Inquisition of this period that provided the Ku Klux Klan with its dunce's uniform. Jews were still not citizens in Holland, and attacks by Jews on the Bible were liable to be seen as attacks on Christianity. So the reaction of Jewish authorities was hardly sympathetic when Spinoza began hanging around outside the synagogue, peddling his unorthodox views. According to him, the authors of the Pentateuch, the opening 5 books of the Bible, were scientific simpletons, and weren't much better as theologians. As if this wasn't enough, the 22-year-old Spinoza also began arguing that there was no evidence in the Bible to prove that God had a body, that the soul was immortal, or that angels existed. Presumably Jacob's wrestling match had been a sort of epileptic fit. Spinoza was an extremely bright young man, and it was virtually impossible to argue with him, so the authorities decided to try a different tack. At first, they attempted to silence him with vague threats, but when they saw that Spinoza was far too headstrong for this to work, they offered him an annuity of 1,000 florins to go away and keep his ideas to himself. In those days, a student could live for a year on 2,000 florins. Considering the seriousness of Spinoza's blasphemies, this was an amazingly lenient approach by the Jewish authorities. But Spinoza spurned their generous offer. This is usually held up as an example of his saintly refusal to be deterred from telling the truth. The 17th-century Jewish community of Amsterdam could be forgiven for viewing it otherwise. What could they do to shut him up? One evening, as Spinoza was leaving the Portuguese synagogue, a man stepped up beside him. In the nick of time, Spinoza noticed the raised dagger in his hand and backed, holding up his cloaked arm to protect himself. The dagger slashed through Spinoza's cloak, but he himself was unhurt, and is said to have kept the slashed cloak as a memorial. The man responsible for this attack is usually represented as a fanatic, and it's quite possible that he was. On the other hand, he too might have been a man of selfless courage, taking it upon himself to rid the community of a dangerous threat by committing a crime for which he would almost certainly be caught and hung. Saintliness and martyrdom can both require a similar arrogance. As if this wasn't enough, Spinoza now sent a long, open letter to the synagogue authorities. In this he outlined in precise detail his views, backing them up with a series of logical arguments which he claimed were irrefutable. The synagogue authorities decided that they now had no alternative. They would have to demonstrate to the Christian community that they no longer had anything to do with this Spinoza. As far as they were concerned, Spinoza was now a non-person, an ex-Jew. In July 1656, a grand ceremony of excommunication was held, and Spinoza was banished in style from the Jewish community. The great horn was blown, the candles were extinguished one by one, and the curse was read out. With the judgment of the angels and the saints, we hereby excommunicate, execrate, and anathematize Baruch de Spinoza. Cursed be he by day, and cursed be he by night, cursed in his lying down, and cursed in his rising up, cursed in going out, and cursed in coming in. The Lord shall destroy his name under the sun, and cut him off for his undoing from all the tribes of Israel. None may speak with him by word of mouth, nor by writing, nor show any favour to him, nor be under one roof with him, nor come within 4 cubits of him, nor read any document written or dictated by him. With such a recommendation, it is little surprise that Spinoza's writings remain eagerly sought after by Jewish and Gentile readers to this day. Meanwhile, this left the 23-year-old Spinoza in a bit of a fix. His father had died a year earlier, leaving him all the cash, whereupon, in the time-honoured fashion, popular with Jew and Gentile alike, the family had bitterly disputed the will. Spinoza's half-sister Rebecca had sued, claiming that the entire estate was by rights hers. Being a saint, Spinoza had no need of all this unearned lucre. But he was also a philosopher, and as such he found it quite unthinkable that he should be defeated in an argument, so Spinoza contested the case. After wasting everyone's time, and earning the lawyers the usual fat fee, Spinoza won the case, and then informed his sister that she could have the lot anyway, except for a 4-poster bed with curtains for privacy, which he rather fancied for himself. Having run through the entire gamut of philosophical gestures, Spinoza now found himself as good as broke, and after the excommunication ceremony he no longer even had a good Jewish home for his bed. Spinoza was forced to put up with a Christian friend called Affinius van den Ende, who ran a private school in his home. Van den Ende was a former Jesuit priest turned liberal. He was a man of wide learning, especially in the classics, and besides being a schoolmaster, also rather fancied himself as a poet and playwright. Affinius van den Ende College, close to the End College, had a good name in the community, though a number of over-anxious parents had recently removed their children when they suspected that they were being taught to think for themselves. Free thinking was officially considered absolutely intolerable, but unofficially it was looked upon as just part of the educational process, a phase which the pupils soon grew out of, much as they do now. Spinoza earned his keep by teaching in van den Ende's small private school. He also took the opportunity of attending a number of the classes, improving his Latin and Greek, quickly catching up on mathematics, and acquainting himself with the scholastic view of Aristotelian philosophy. Around this time he began studying the commentaries on Aristotle by the great Jewish scholars Moses ben Maimon, usually known to us as Maimonides, and Chasdai Crescas of Saragossa, usually not known to us at all. The latter held the view that matter was eternal, and that the creation was simply the imposition of order upon it, a doctrine which was heavily to influence Spinoza's own philosophy. In the evenings, van den Ende introduced Spinoza to the latest writings of Descartes, which were now revolutionizing philosophy. Descartes' rigidly mechanistic view of the workings of the universe was to play a decisive role in Spinoza's thinking, though he was to ignore the modern subjective component of Descartes' philosophy, which had made it so revolutionary in the first place. It was probably at this time that Spinoza also read the great 16th-century free spirit and original thinker Giordano Bruno, whose curious blend of occult ideas and advanced scientific thought enabled him to achieve the distinction of being excommunicated by both the Protestants and the Catholics, who also burned him at the stake for good measure. Once again Spinoza ignored the dazzlingly original aspects of this philosophy, as well as some fantastic black magic, in favor of Bruno's metaphysical belief in an infinite and pantheistic universe. One by one, Spinoza was assembling the ingredients which, when cooked in the hot oven of his intellect, were to produce the unsurpassed confectionery of his philosophy, a creation of infinite sweetness, containing a mouth-watering variety of philosophical cherries, plum observations, and sickly theological cream, all overlaid with marzipantheism and coated with rigid geometric icing, topped by the single glowing candle of its uniqueness. We will discover later what all this tasted like. But at this stage Spinoza was sweet on more than philosophy. He is said to have fallen in love with van den Ende's daughter, Clara Maria. Judging from the portraits and descriptions we have of Spinoza, he may well have created a slightly odd impression in later life, but in the young man these genius mannerisms were almost certainly still dormant. Sources speak of him being short, with a swarthy complexion and black curly hair. One might easily know by his looks that he was descended from Portuguese Jews, says one, while another speaks of him having the appearance of a Sephardic grandee. Clara Maria van den Ende taught classics and music at her father's school. According to one source, she was none of the most beautiful, but she had a great deal of wit, a jovial humour, and a great capacity. For what is not specified. Unfortunately, she fell for one of her students, a young man called Dirk Keckrink, whom she ended up marrying. Other sources dismiss this story, pointing out that Clara Maria was only 12 at the time. Whether or not Humbert Spinoza fell for Clara Lolita, other evidence suggests that Spinoza was not the sexually dormant genius figure so beloved of his early hagiographers. Unique among the great philosophers, Spinoza was to write with penetrating psychological awareness about love and sexual jealousy. In his Ethics he proposes, "The stronger the emotion which we imagine the person we love to feel for us, the more we are filled with self-pride." In the ensuing proposition he insists, "If anyone thinks that there is between his beloved and another person the same or a more intimate feeling of love than there was between them when he alone loved her, he will feel hatred for the one he loved and be gripped with envy for his rival." And he goes on to define jealousy as the swings of feeling arising from the simultaneous experience of love and hatred, together with bitter envy for a third person.